The small Oklahoma town of Fairhaven felt like a place that time had abandoned. Its cracked sidewalks, boarded-up windows, and overgrown lawns whispered stories of decay and neglect. It wasn't the kind of town that invited people to stay long, but for Richard Donovan, it was perfect. After years of struggling in the city, he was ready to start fresh. The sprawling old house perched on the hill was a bargain, too good to pass up. Richard, his wife Anna, and their 6-year-old daughter Ellie arrived on a gray afternoon, with storm clouds rolling in from the west. Anna stood on the gravel driveway, her arms wrapped around herself despite the warm breeze. The house loomed over her, a hulking structure of weather-beaten wood and sagging shutters. "It's got character," Richard had said when they toured it weeks earlier. Now, staring at the empty windows that seemed to watch her like hollow eyes, Anna couldn't shake the feeling that they were being warned away. "Mommy, look." Ellie's voice broke through her thoughts. The little girl was twirling on the overgrown lawn, her curly blonde hair catching the weak sunlight. She seemed oblivious to the eerie silence that hung over the place. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Richard said, coming up behind Anna. He slipped an arm around her shoulders. "A little work, and it'll be perfect." Anna forced a smile. "Yeah, perfect." They spent the rest of the day unpacking. The movers had dropped off the last of their things in the morning, and the house was a maze of cardboard boxes and mismatched furniture. By evening, they'd managed to set up the basics: a makeshift living room with a couch and a TV, beds in the upstairs bedrooms, and a small dining area in the kitchen. As they ate dinner that night, pizza on paper plates, Anna couldn't shake the oppressive weight of the house. The ceilings felt too low, the shadows too long. Even Richard, usually so upbeat, seemed quieter than usual. Ellie, on the other hand, chattered happily about her new room, completely unfazed by the creaking floors and drafty windows. It was after Ellie had gone to bed that Anna finally voiced her unease. They were sitting in the living room, the only light coming from the flickering glow of the TV. "Does this place feel strange to you?" she asked. Richard looked at her over the rim of his beer can. "Strange how?" "I don't know. Like it's heavy. Like we're not supposed to be here." He chuckled. "It's an old house, Anna. Of course it's going to feel weird at first. Give it time." She wanted to argue but bit her tongue. Richard was doing his best to make this work, and the last thing she wanted was to add to his stress. "Maybe you're right," she said softly, but as they climbed the creaky stairs to bed, she couldn't help glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see something, or someone, lurking in the shadows. The next few days were a blur of activity. Richard threw himself into fixing up the house, patching holes in the walls and replacing broken light fixtures. Anna spent her time unpacking, trying to turn the drafty old place into a home. Ellie explored every nook and cranny, her laughter echoing through the empty halls. But the house wasn't as empty as it seemed. It started with the little things. Doors that Anna knew she had closed would be open again. Lights flickered, even though the wiring had just been replaced. One morning, she found the kitchen faucet running full blast, though she was sure she'd turned it off the night before. Richard brushed it off as her imagination, but Anna couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then, one afternoon, Ellie came running into the kitchen with wide, frightened eyes. "Mommy, there's someone in the basement," she said. Anna froze. "What do you mean? Sweetie?" "I saw her," Ellie insisted. "A lady with black wings. She was staring at me." Anna's heart pounded. "Ellie, that's not funny." "I'm not joking," Ellie cried. Tears welled up in her eyes. She was there. Richard came in at that moment, wiping his hands on a rag. "What's going on?" "Ellie thinks she saw someone in the basement," Anna said, her voice tight. Richard frowned. "There's no one down there. Kiddo, I just checked it this morning." Ellie clung to Anna's leg, trembling. "She's real. Daddy, I saw her." Richard sighed. "All right, I'll go look again." He grabbed a flashlight from the counter and headed toward the basement door. The stairs groaned under his weight as he descended into the gloom. Anna stood at the top, holding Ellie close, straining to hear any sound. Minutes passed. Finally, Richard's voice echoed up from below. "There's nothing down here," he called. But Anna could hear the tension in his tone. When he came back up, his face was pale, and he was clutching something in his hand. It was a small statue, carved from black stone. The figure it depicted was grotesque. A woman with leathery wings, razor-sharp teeth, and clawed hands. Anna recoiled at the sight of it. "What the hell is that?" she whispered. "I found it in the corner," Richard said. "Probably some kind of old decoration. This house is full of weird junk." Anna stared at the statue, a chill running down her spine. There was something deeply wrong about it, something that made her skin crawl. "You should put it back," she said. Richard laughed nervously. "It's just a piece of stone, Anna. It's not going to hurt anyone." But as he set the statue on the kitchen counter, Anna couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching her. That night, as she lay in bed, the sound of faint whispers drifted through the house. At first, she thought it was the wind, but as the whispers grew louder, she realized they were coming from the basement, and they were calling her name. Over the next few days, the house seemed to come alive, but not in the way Richard or Anna had hoped. The whispers Anna had heard that first night didn't stop. If anything, they grew louder, more persistent, threading through the silence of the old house like a dark melody. Sometimes, she would catch faint words among the murmurs, words in a language she didn't understand, harsh and guttural. Ellie was the first to change. The cheerful, adventurous little girl who had danced across the lawn on their first day began to withdraw. She spent hours sitting on her bed, staring at the corner of her room. When Anna asked what was wrong, Ellie would only shake her head, her wide eyes darting toward the shadows. One evening, as Anna tucked her into bed, Ellie grabbed her mother's wrist. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "She's watching." Anna's stomach turned. "Who's watching?" "Sweetheart, the lady with the wings," Ellie said. "She's in my room at night." Anna fought to keep her voice steady. "It's just a bad dream. Ellie, there's no one here but us." Ellie's grip tightened. "She's real. She sits by my bed and smiles at me." The next day, Anna tried to bring it up with Richard, but he waved her off. "Kids have vivid imaginations," he said. "You're feeding into it by acting like it's real." "But it feels real," Anna insisted. "She's terrified, Richard, and she's not the only one who feels it." You what?" Richard interrupted, his voice sharper than she'd expected. "You think the house is haunted? That some ghost is sitting in Ellie's room at night? Come on, Anna, be serious." She stared at him, searching his face for some flicker of understanding, but he only looked annoyed. "Fine," she said finally, turning away. "Forget it." But she couldn't forget it. That night, Anna lay awake long after Richard had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling. Every creak of the old house set her nerves on edge. When the whispers started again, she froze. They seemed louder this time, closer. Slowly, she slid out of bed, careful not to wake Richard, and crept toward the door. The whispers led her to Ellie's room. The door was ajar, and a sliver of pale moonlight spilled into the hallway. Anna pushed it open, her heart pounding. Ellie was sitting up in bed, her small figure illuminated by the faint glow of the night light. But she wasn't alone. A shadow loomed at the foot of the bed. It was tall and gaunt, with long, spindly limbs and wings that unfurled like the sails of a ghostly ship. Its face was a grotesque mask of sharp angles and hollow eyes that seemed to burn with a crimson light. Anna gasped, and the shadow turned to her, its mouth twisting into a jagged smile. Then, in an instant, it was gone. "Mommy?" Ellie's voice was a fragile whisper. "Did you see her?" Anna rushed to her daughter's side, wrapping her in a tight embrace. "It's okay," she said, though her voice shook. "I'm here. I won't let anything happen to you." But even as she said the words, she knew they were hollow. The next morning, Anna decided to do some research. She pulled out her laptop and started looking up information about the house. Most of what she found was vague, rumors about strange noises, odd smells, and a string of short-term tenants who all left abruptly. But then she stumbled across an old newspaper article about the house's original owner, a man named Samuel Wren. Samuel had been an archaeologist, known for his controversial expeditions to ancient Mesopotamian sites. According to the article, he brought back numerous artifacts from his travels, many of which were considered sacred or cursed by local cultures. Samuel had lived in the house alone until his mysterious death in the basement. The article didn't go into detail, but the words ritual markings and suspicious circumstances stood out to Anna like red flags. She closed the laptop and stared at the black stone statue on the counter. Was it one of Samuel's artifacts? And if so, what had he brought into this house? Richard's behavior grew stranger as the days passed. He spent more and more time in the basement, tinkering with things he wouldn't explain. When Anna asked what he was doing, he brushed her off, saying he needed space. But she couldn't ignore the way his eyes seemed darker, more distant, as if he were somewhere else entirely. One night, after putting Ellie to bed, Anna decided to check on him. The basement door was slightly open, and she could hear him muttering to himself. She crept down the stairs, careful to keep her footsteps light. When she reached the bottom, she stopped cold. Richard was kneeling on the floor, surrounded by strange symbols drawn in chalk. The black stone statue sat in the center of the circle, and Richard was speaking to it in a low, guttural voice that didn't sound like his own. "Richard?" Anna's voice was barely above a whisper, but it echoed in the confined space. He turned to her slowly, his eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice distorted and unfamiliar. Anna backed up the stairs, her heart racing. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Protecting us," he said, standing and advancing toward her. "This house, it's alive. It needs us to obey." "Obey what?" Anna shouted. "What are you talking about?" He didn't answer, just grabbed her arm and pushed her toward the stairs. "Go back to bed." "Anna, you don't understand." She pulled free and ran up the stairs, slamming the door behind her. But as she leaned against it, gasping for breath, she realized she could still hear him, muttering those strange, guttural words to the darkness below. The following morning, Anna woke up to find Richard acting as if nothing had happened. He sat at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee, flipping through the local newspaper, and talking to Ellie about her plans for the day. His demeanor was calm, almost unnervingly so, given the events of the previous night. Anna hovered by the kitchen doorway, watching him closely. "Richard," she said finally, her voice tentative. "About last night?" He glanced up at her, a puzzled expression on his face. "What about last night?" "The basement. You were," she hesitated, unsure how to phrase it. "You were doing something. With that statue." Richard frowned. "Anna, I was working on the pipes. You must have been dreaming or something." Anna stared at him, her heart sinking. Was he lying? Or did he genuinely not remember? The memory of his glowing eyes and guttural voice was too vivid to dismiss as a dream. But his casual dismissal left her questioning herself. Ellie tugged at Anna's sleeve, breaking her train of thought. "Mommy, can I go play outside?" "Of course, sweetheart," Anna said distractedly. She kissed Ellie on the top of her head and watched as the little girl ran out into the yard. Richard's voice brought her back. "Anna, you've been tense ever since we moved in. Maybe you're letting this place get to you." Anna wanted to argue, but the rational part of her mind warned her against it. If Richard was lying, or worse, if he was being influenced by something, she needed to tread carefully. "Maybe you're right," she said softly, forcing a smile. "It's just a lot to adjust to." But deep down, she knew she couldn't let this go. That afternoon, while Richard was out running errands, Anna decided to search the house for answers. She started in the basement, her skin crawling as she descended the creaking stairs. The strange symbols Richard had drawn were still faintly visible on the floor, though much of the chalk had been smeared or rubbed away. The black stone statue sat on a dusty shelf, its hollow eyes seeming to follow her as she moved through the room. Anna hesitated before reaching for the statue. The moment her fingers brushed against the cold stone, a jolt of nausea swept through her. She staggered back, clutching her stomach, and dropped the statue on the floor. It didn't break, but the sound of it hitting the concrete echoed loudly in the confined space. As she straightened, She noticed something she hadn't seen before, a small, hidden compartment built into the wall. It was partially obscured by a stack of old boxes, and she had to strain to pull them away. Inside, she found a collection of dusty books and rolled-up parchment. She carried them upstairs to the kitchen, her hands trembling. The books were filled with strange, arcane symbols and writings in a language Anna didn't recognize. The parchment, however, contained diagrams and notes in English. As she unrolled one of the papers, her breath caught. It was a drawing of the black stone statue, accompanied by a detailed description: Lamashtu, the devourer, ancient Mesopotamian demoness of death and disease, known for her relentless torment of mothers and children, associated with stillbirths, madness, and nightmares. Anna's hands shook as she read further. The notes described rituals used to summon Lamashtu, as well as ways to bind her power. One passage was underlined in red ink: once summoned, she cannot be dismissed unless the summoner willingly sacrifices what is most dear to them. What the hell is this? Anna whispered. She looked at the books and papers scattered across the table, feeling as though the walls of the house were closing in on her. Richard had insisted the statue was just a piece of junk, but these notes suggested otherwise. Had Samuel Wren, the house's original owner, summoned Lamashtu? And if so, why? The sound of the front door opening startled her. She quickly gathered the papers and books, stuffing them back into the compartment beneath the basement stairs just as Richard walked into the kitchen. "Hey," he said, setting a bag of groceries on the counter. "What you been up to?" Anna forced a smile. "Just tidying up. This place is a mess." Richard nodded absently, his attention already shifting elsewhere. But Anna noticed the way his eyes lingered on the basement door, and the unease in her chest grew stronger. That night, Anna barely slept. She lay awake, listening to the house creak and groan, every sound amplified in the darkness. At some point, she must have drifted off, because she woke to the sound of Ellie screaming. Anna bolted out of bed, her heart pounding. She raced down the hall to Ellie's room, Richard close behind her. When she flung open the door, she found Ellie huddled in the corner, clutching her stuffed rabbit, tears streaming down her face. "She was here," Ellie sobbed. "The lady with the wings. She was here." Anna knelt beside her daughter, pulling her into a tight embrace. "It's okay, baby," she murmured, even as her own fear threatened to overwhelm her. "You're safe. Mommy's here." Richard stood frozen in the doorway, his face pale. For the first time, he didn't brush off Ellie's words as a bad dream. "Anna," he said quietly, "we need to leave." But even as he said it, Anna knew it wouldn't be that simple. The next morning, Richard and Anna agreed to leave the house. They packed hastily, stuffing clothes and essentials into suitcases. Ellie stayed close to Anna, refusing to let go of her hand. Richard moved through the house with a sense of urgency, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a simmering unease. As they were loading the car, Richard paused. "Wait," he said, glancing back toward the house. "I forgot something in the basement." "Richard." "No," Anna said sharply. "We don't need anything from down there." "It's important," he insisted. "I'll be quick." Before Anna could stop him, he disappeared into the house. Minutes ticked by, and he didn't return. Anna left Ellie in the car and went back inside, calling his name. The basement door was open. "Richard," she called, her voice trembling. There was no answer. She descended the stairs slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. When she reached the bottom, she found him standing in the center of the room, holding the black stone statue. His eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and his lips were moving, though the words were too soft for her to hear. "Richard, stop," Anna said, her voice shaking. "We need to leave. Now." He turned to her, his face a mask of torment. "I can't," he said hoarsely. "She won't let me." The shadows in the room seemed to shift, growing darker, denser. A chill swept through the air, and Anna felt the oppressive weight of something ancient and malevolent pressing down on her. "You have to fight it," she pleaded. "Whatever this is, you can fight it." But Richard only shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "It's too late." And then the whispers returned, louder than ever, filling the room with a cacophony of harsh, guttural voices. The shadows coalesced into a shape, a towering figure with leathery wings and glowing red eyes. Anna screamed. Anna's scream echoed through the basement, but the sound seemed swallowed by the oppressive darkness. The figure with leathery wings loomed before her, its glowing red eyes boring into her soul. It was both tangible and ethereal, a grotesque blend of shadows and malice that radiated an overwhelming sense of doom. "Richard, please," Anna cried, her voice cracking as she reached for him. But Richard didn't move. He stood frozen, clutching the black stone statue as if it were the only thing tethering him to reality. His lips moved, but the words spilling from his mouth weren't his own. The guttural, otherworldly syllables filled the air, blending with the cacophony of whispers surrounding them. The figure stretched its wings wide, casting a shadow that seemed to consume the entire room. Its face, angular and grotesque, twisted into a jagged smile that revealed rows of razor-sharp teeth. It let out a low, guttural laugh, a sound that made Anna's stomach churn. Anna stumbled backward, her hands scrambling for the staircase. "Richard, come with me," she begged, tears streaming down her face. Richard's head snapped toward her, his eyes glowing an unnatural yellow. "She has chosen us." "Anna," he said, his voice distorted and unrecognizable. "We can't leave." "No," Anna screamed. "I won't let her take you." The figure lunged toward Anna, its wings slicing through the air with a deafening roar. She turned and bolted up the stairs, her heart pounding as the sound of heavy, clawed footsteps echoed behind her. When she reached the top, she slammed the door shut and threw her weight against it, gasping for breath. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a slow, deliberate knock came from the other side of the door. "Anna," Richard's voice called, soft and pleading. "Open the door." She pressed her hands over her ears, shaking her head. "You're not him," she whispered, her voice trembling. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. "Anna, please, it's me." Tears streamed down her face as she backed away from the door. The knocking stopped abruptly, replaced by a low, guttural growl. The doorknob twisted violently, and the door began to shake as something on the other side slammed against it. Anna turned and ran, her mind racing. She needed to get to Ellie. Ellie was sitting in the car, her small hands clutching her stuffed rabbit tightly. Her wide eyes were fixed on the house, and when she saw Anna running toward her, she unlocked the door. "Mommy, where's Daddy?" Ellie asked, her voice trembling. Anna climbed into the driver's seat, slamming the door behind her. "We're leaving," she said, fumbling with the keys. "But Daddy..." "Ellie, we can't help him," Anna said, her voice breaking. She started the car, but the engine sputtered and died. "No, no, no," she whispered, frantically turning the key again. The engine refused to start. A loud crash came from the house, and Anna looked up to see the front door fly open. Richard stood in the doorway, the black statue in one hand and something else in the other, a jagged, rusted knife. His eyes glowed with a fiery intensity, and his lips were curled into a feral snarl. "He's not Daddy," Ellie whispered, her voice barely audible. Anna grabbed Ellie's hand and opened the car door. "We have to run," she said, pulling her daughter toward the woods behind the house. The woods were dark and tangled, the gnarled branches clawing at Anna's arms as she and Ellie stumbled through the underbrush. The whispers followed them, growing louder with each step. It was as if the very air around them was alive, filled with the malevolent presence of something ancient and insatiable. "Mommy, I'm scared," Ellie whimpered, her small hand clutching Anna's tightly. "I know, baby," Anna said, her voice shaking. "But we're going to be okay. We just have to keep moving." Behind them, the sound of heavy footsteps grew closer. Anna glanced over her shoulder and saw Richard, or what used to be Richard, stalking toward them. His movements were jerky and unnatural, like a puppet being yanked on invisible strings. The statue in his hand seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and the shadows around him writhed like living things. "You can't run from her," he called, his voice echoing unnaturally through the trees. "She will find you." Anna pushed Ellie forward, her heart racing. "Don't listen to him. Just keep going." They broke through the trees into a small clearing, and Anna spotted an old, dilapidated cabin. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades, but it was their only option. She pulled Ellie toward it, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The cabin door creaked open with a touch, revealing a single, dusty room filled with cobwebs and broken furniture. Anna pushed Ellie inside and shut the door, wedging a splintered chair under the handle. "Stay here," she whispered, kneeling in front of Ellie. "Don't make a sound." "Okay." Ellie nodded, tears streaming down her face. Anna hugged her tightly, her mind racing. She needed a plan, but the weight of the situation pressed down on her like a vice. How could she fight something she didn't understand? A loud crash came from outside, and the cabin walls shook. Anna stood, her eyes darting around the room. There was a rusted axe leaning against the wall near the fireplace. She grabbed it, her hands trembling. The door shuddered as something slammed against it, the wood splintering under the force. "Anna," Richard's voice called, low and guttural. "Let me in." "Go away," she screamed, raising the axe. The door burst open, and Richard stepped inside, his glowing eyes fixed on Anna. The shadows around him writhed and coiled, forming grotesque shapes that seemed to reach for her. "She won't let you go," he said, his voice a twisted mixture of pleading and menace. "You're hers now." Anna swung the axe, the blade slicing through the air. It hit Richard's shoulder with a sickening thud, but he didn't even flinch. Instead, he smiled, his teeth stained with blood. The shadows surged forward, engulfing Anna in an icy embrace. She struggled, gasping for breath as the darkness pressed against her, filling her ears with a deafening roar. Through the haze, she heard Ellie scream. When Anna woke, she was lying on the floor of the cabin. The shadows were gone, and the air was still. She sat up, her head pounding, and looked around. Ellie was gone. "No," Anna whispered, scrambling to her feet. "Ellie." She stumbled out of the cabin, her heart racing. The woods were silent, the oppressive whispers replaced by an eerie calm. In the distance, she saw a flicker of movement and ran toward it, her lungs burning. When she reached the clearing, she froze. Richard was standing in the center, the black stone statue cradled in his hands. Ellie stood in front of him, her small figure trembling as he whispered to her. The shadows coiled around them like a living cage. "Let her go," Anna screamed, running toward them. Richard looked up, his glowing eyes locking onto hers. "It's too late," he said. "She's already taken her." Anna lunged at him, grabbing the statue from his hands. The moment her fingers touched the cold stone, a surge of energy shot through her, and she collapsed to her knees. The world around her dissolved into darkness, and the last thing she heard was Lamashtu's laughter, low and cruel, echoing through the void. Anna opened her eyes to find herself surrounded by darkness. It was an endless void, suffocating and cold, yet she felt as though 1,000 unseen eyes were watching her. Her body ached, her limbs heavy, as if they were weighed down by invisible chains. She tried to move, but found herself rooted in place, her bare feet sinking into a slick, black surface that felt neither solid nor liquid. A voice echoed through the void, low, guttural, and mocking. "You came so far, Anna, but you belong to me now." Anna's head snapped up, her heart pounding. "Who are you? Where's Ellie?" she shouted, her voice trembling with fear and defiance. The darkness rippled, and the towering figure of Lamashtu emerged, her grotesque wings unfurling like the shadow of death itself. Her face was a twisted mockery of humanity, sharp angles, burning red eyes, and a mouth filled with jagged teeth. The air grew colder, and Anna felt a suffocating weight press against her chest. "Ellie is mine," Lamashtu hissed, her voice slithering into Anna's mind like poison. "She has been marked since the moment you stepped into my domain. You offered her to me the day you touched the statue." "No," Anna screamed, her fists clenching. "You can't have her." The demoness laughed, the sound reverberating through the void like a thunderclap. "Foolish mortal, You think you can take her back from me? You think your pathetic love can undo the bond one have forged? Anna's fear began to burn into anger. She straightened her back, meeting Lamashtu's gaze. I'll do whatever it takes to save her. You hear me? I'll fight you. I'll destroy you if I have to. Lamashtu's grin widened, her teeth glinting like knives. Then stepped forward. Little moth, let us see if your flame can withstand the abyss. Suddenly, the ground beneath Anna shifted, and she was plunged into freefall. She tumbled through the darkness, her screams swallowed by the void. When she finally landed, it was in a place that seemed even worse than the abyss. She was in the basement of the house, but it was distorted, twisted. The walls were covered in pulsating black veins, and the air stank of decay and blood. The black stone statue sat in the center of the room, glowing faintly with an unnatural light. Richard knelt beside it, his body contorted in an unnatural posture, his head jerking as if he were a marionette controlled by invisible strings. And then there was Ellie. She stood at the edge of the room, her small frame dwarfed by the swirling shadows around her. Her eyes were wide, filled with terror, but she didn't move. The shadows seemed to wrap around her like chains, holding her in place. Ellie, Anna cried, rushing toward her daughter. The shadows surged forward, slamming into Anna like a tidal wave. She was thrown back, her head hitting the cold, slimy floor. Pain exploded in her skull, but she forced herself to stand. Ellie, look at me. Fight it, baby. Anna shouted, her voice cracking. Ellie's lips quivered, but she didn't speak. Her gaze shifted to Lamashtu, who now stood beside her, one clawed hand resting on the little girl's shoulder. She is mine, Lamashtu said, her voice dripping with malice. But if you insist on fighting, I will give you a chance. Anna's breath hitched. What do you mean? The demoness gestured to Richard, who remained frozen beside the statue. Free him, she said. Break his bond to me, and I will release your daughter. Anna's stomach churned. Richard was barely recognizable, his body twisted and his face contorted in agony. Whatever Lamashtu had done to him, it had pushed him to the brink of humanity. But if freeing him meant saving Ellie, she had no choice. What do I have to do? Anna asked, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. Lamashtu chuckled darkly. You must sever his connection to the statue, destroy it, and his bond to me will be broken. Anna's eyes flicked to the black stone statue. Its glow pulsed rhythmically, as if it had a heartbeat. She approached it cautiously, the air growing colder with each step. The shadows around the room writhed and hissed, as though warning her to stay away. When she reached the statue, she hesitated. Its surface seemed to ripple, and she could feel an immense power radiating from it. She glanced back at Richard, who was now convulsing violently, his lips moving as though he were speaking in tongues. Richard, I'm going to save you, she whispered. I promise. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and touched the statue. The moment her hand made contact, a surge of energy shot through her, and she was thrown backward. Her vision blurred, and she felt as though her mind was being pulled in 1,000 directions at once. Images flashed before her eyes. Richard in the basement, whispering to the statue. Ellie crying in her bed, calling for her. Lamashtu standing in the shadows, watching them all with a predatory gaze. A voice, deep and ancient, echoed in her mind. You cannot destroy me. I am eternal. Anna gritted her teeth, her nails digging into the floor as she forced herself to her feet. You're not eternal, she spat. You're just a parasite, feeding on fear and pain. She stumbled toward the statue again, her body screaming in protest. This time, she grabbed it with both hands, ignoring the searing pain that shot up her arms. The surface of the statue seemed to writhe under her touch, and she could feel the weight of Lamashtu's power pressing down on her. But she didn't let go. You won't take my family, Anna growled through gritted teeth. Not today. Not ever. With a surge of strength she didn't know she had, Anna lifted the statue above her head and slammed it onto the ground. The impact sent a shockwave through the room, and the statue shattered into 1,000 pieces. The effect was immediate. The shadows recoiled, screeching as they dissolved into the air. Richard collapsed to the floor, his body convulsing before falling still. Lamashtu let out an ear-piercing scream, her form flickering like a dying flame. "You think you've won?" she snarled, her red eyes blazing. "This is not the end. Anna, I will find you again. I will find her." And with that, she vanished, her laughter echoing through the room. Anna dropped to her knees, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath. She crawled toward Ellie, pulling her daughter into her arms. "It's okay, baby," she whispered. "It's over. We're safe now." Ellie clung to her, sobbing. "Mommy, I was so scared." "I know, sweetheart, I know." Anna looked over at Richard, who was stirring weakly. His eyes fluttered open, and for the first time in days, they were clear. "Anna," he croaked. What happened?" "We're going home," Anna said firmly, helping him to his feet. "All of us." The family stumbled out of the basement, the air feeling lighter with every step. As they stepped into the sunlight, Anna looked back at the house one last time. It stood silent and still, its ominous presence finally lifted. But as they drove away, Anna couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. In the rearview mirror, for just a moment, she thought she saw a pair of glowing red eyes in the shadows. And then they were gone. The car sped down the country road, the Donovan family sitting in tense silence. Anna gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white, as she glanced in the rearview mirror for the 100th time. The house was miles behind them, but the oppressive weight of what had happened still clung to her like a shroud. Ellie sat in the back seat, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her face pale and drawn. Richard sat beside her, his head resting against the window, his eyes closed. His breathing was shallow, and every so often, he muttered something under his breath, too faint for Anna to hear. "Are you okay, baby?" Anna asked Ellie, forcing her voice to sound calm. Ellie nodded slightly but didn't speak. Her gaze was fixed on the road ahead, as if afraid to look anywhere else. Anna's grip on the wheel tightened. She wanted to believe it was over, that by destroying the statue, she had severed Lamashtu's hold on them. But the memory of those glowing red eyes in the rearview mirror refused to fade. A part of her couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't truly escaped. They arrived at a motel just before dusk, the neon sign flickering faintly in the gathering gloom. The building was old and run down, but Anna didn't care. It was far from the house, and that was all that mattered. "I'll check us in," she said, stepping out of the car. She glanced at Richard, who still hadn't opened his eyes. "Stay here with Ellie." "Okay." Richard nodded weakly, his lips barely moving. Inside the motel office, the air was stale, and the receptionist barely looked up as Anna approached the desk. She signed the guest book with shaky hands, her mind racing. The name Lamashtu echoed in her thoughts, a sinister whisper she couldn't drown out. Back in the car, Ellie had fallen asleep, her small body curled up against Richard's side. Anna gently shook Richard's shoulder. "Come on," she said softly. "Let's get her inside." Richard stirred, his eyes opening slowly. For a moment, they were clouded, distant, and Anna felt a pang of fear. But then he blinked, and the clarity returned. "Yeah," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "Okay." They carried Ellie into the room, laying her on one of the twin beds. Anna pulled the blanket over her daughter, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Ellie's breathing was slow and steady, but her brow was furrowed as if she were caught in a bad dream. "I'll take the other bed," Richard said, sinking onto the mattress. He looked exhausted, his face pale and gaunt. "You should get some rest too." Anna nodded but didn't lie down. Instead, she sat in the chair by the window, staring out into the dark. The feeling of being watched hadn't left her, and she couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. Anna woke with a start, her neck stiff from sleeping in the chair. The room was dark, the only light coming from the flickering neon sign outside. She glanced at the clock on the bedside table. 3:12 a.m. Something was wrong. Her heart began to race as she scanned the room. Richard was still on his bed, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. But Ellie's bed was empty. "Ellie," Anna whispered, her voice trembling. She stood, her eyes darting around the room. "Ellie, where are you?" A faint sound came from the bathroom, a soft, muffled sob. Anna rushed to the door, her heart pounding. "Ellie," she called, pushing it open. The sight that greeted her made her blood run cold. Ellie was standing in front of the mirror, her back to Anna. Her small hands were pressed against the glass, and she was whispering something in a low, rhythmic tone. The reflection in the mirror was wrong. Ellie's face was distorted, her eyes black and hollow, her mouth stretched into a twisted smile. "Ellie," Anna shouted, grabbing her daughter's shoulders and pulling her away from the mirror. Ellie turned to her, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "She's here." Anna's stomach dropped. "Who's here, baby?" "The lady," Ellie said, her eyes filling with tears. "She's in the mirror." Anna turned to the mirror, but it was just a piece of glass reflecting the room. She pulled Ellie into her arms, her mind racing. "It's okay," she said, though her voice shook. "You're safe. She can't hurt you." But even as she said the words, she wasn't sure she believed them. The next morning, Richard was worse. His skin was clammy, his eyes sunken, and his movements slow and uncoordinated. He barely touched the breakfast Anna had brought back to the room, and when she asked if he was feeling okay, he just nodded faintly. "We need to get help," Anna said, sitting beside him. "Whatever's happening to you, it's not normal." "I'll be fine," Richard muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just need rest." Anna wasn't convinced, but she didn't want to push him. She turned her attention to Ellie, who was sitting on the bed, drawing in her sketchbook. But when Anna glanced at the page, her heart skipped a beat. Ellie had drawn the black stone statue, its grotesque features rendered in chilling detail. Around it, she had scribbled shadowy figures with glowing red eyes. "Ellie," Anna said carefully, "why are you drawing this?" Ellie didn't look up. "Because she told me to." Anna's blood ran cold. "Who told you?" Ellie paused, her pencil hovering over the page. "The lady. She says we can't leave her." Anna grabbed the sketchbook, flipping through the pages. Every drawing was the same. Lamashtu, the statue, and the shadows. The sense of dread in her chest deepened. That night, the whispers returned. Anna lay awake in the chair by the window, her nerves on edge. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. But the whispers were unmistakable. They slithered through the air like tendrils of smoke, soft and insidious. She stood, her hands trembling, and moved toward the bathroom. The whispers grew louder as she approached, and when she opened the door, the mirror was covered in a thick, black substance that oozed down the glass like tar. "Anna," a voice hissed from the darkness. "You can't run from me." Anna stumbled back, her heart racing. The room seemed to close in around her, the walls pulsating like a living thing. She turned and ran to the bed, shaking Richard awake. "Richard, wake up," she cried. "Something's happening." Richard opened his eyes, and Anna gasped. They were glowing faintly, the same unnatural yellow she had seen before. He sat up slowly, his movements stiff and jerky. "She's coming," he said, his voice distorted. "She's never going to stop." Anna backed away, her mind racing. "No," she whispered. "You're stronger than this. Fight her." Richard stood, his body trembling. "It's too late," he said. "She's already inside me." A loud crash came from the bathroom, and Anna turned just in time to see the mirror shatter, shards of glass flying in every direction. When she looked back, Ellie was gone. "Ellie!" Anna screamed, rushing toward the empty bed. "Ellie, where are you?" The whispers grew louder, filling the room with a deafening roar. Shadows coiled around Anna, pulling at her arms and legs, dragging her toward the bathroom. "No," she screamed, fighting against them. "I won't let you take her." But the darkness was too strong. It enveloped her, pulling her into the void once more. Anna woke to find herself in the abyss once more, the oppressive darkness pressing down on her. Lamashtu's laughter echoed around her, low and cruel. "You thought you could escape me?" the demoness hissed. "You thought you could save her?" Anna struggled to her feet, her body trembling. "Where is she? Where's Ellie?" Lamashtu emerged from the shadows, her grotesque form towering over Anna. "She is mine now," the demoness said, her voice dripping with malice. "But don't worry, you'll join her soon enough." Anna clenched her fists, her fear burning into determination. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, "and I'm not giving up." Lamashtu's eyes narrowed, her jagged smile twisting into a snarl. "Then let us see how long your defiance lasts." Anna felt the cold void press against her skin as if she were being swallowed by an ocean of shadow. The air was thick and heavy, her every breath a struggle. Around her, the abyss shifted and writhed, alive with the whispers of countless voices. Lamashtu's laughter echoed through the darkness, a cruel and mocking sound that seemed to burrow into her skull. "I told you," the demoness hissed, her grotesque form materializing before Anna. "You can't escape me. You can't save her." Anna forced herself to stand, her legs trembling beneath her. Her eyes blazed with defiance as she met Lamashtu's fiery gaze. "Where is Ellie?" she demanded, her voice shaking but resolute. "What have you done to her?" Lamashtu grinned, her jagged teeth gleaming in the dim, unnatural light. "She is where she belongs. With me." The demoness stepped aside, revealing a grotesque tableau that made Anna's stomach drop. Ellie stood in the center of a swirling vortex of shadows, her small frame dwarfed by the writhing tendrils that coiled around her like serpents. Her face was pale, her eyes dull and lifeless. Above her, a dark, pulsating mass hung in the air, its surface shifting and rippling like liquid. It radiated a terrible energy that made Anna's skin crawl. "Ellie!" Anna screamed, rushing toward her daughter. The shadows surged forward, slamming into Anna with the force of a tidal wave. She was thrown backward, hitting the ground hard. Pain shot through her body, but she forced herself to her knees, her eyes never leaving Ellie. "She is mine now," Lamashtu said, her voice dripping with malice. "Her fear, her innocence, they feed me. Soon, she will be one with the void, and you will join her." "No," Anna said, her voice trembling but fierce. "I won't let you take her." Lamashtu laughed, a sound that echoed endlessly through the abyss. "And what will you do, little moth? How will you fight the eternal?" Anna's mind raced. She had no weapons, no knowledge of how to combat something as ancient and powerful as Lamashtu. But she had something stronger than the demon's malice. She had love. She had a mother's desperation, and she would not let Ellie go without a fight. She rose to her feet, every muscle in her body screaming in protest. "Ellie," she called, her voice breaking through the cacophony of whispers. "Ellie, listen to me. You have to fight her. You're stronger than she is." Ellie's head turned slightly, her dull eyes meeting Anna's. For a moment, there was a flicker of recognition, a spark of life, but the shadows tightened around her, pulling her closer to the pulsating mass above her head. "She can't hear you," Lamashtu sneered. "She belongs to me now." Anna ignored her, focusing all her energy on her daughter. "Ellie, remember who you are. Remember the day we danced in the rain, or the time you painted that picture of the sunflowers. Remember Daddy making silly faces at dinner. That's who you are. Not this." Tears streamed down her face as she screamed the words, her voice raw with emotion. "Come back to me, Ellie." The shadows hesitated, their movements faltering. Ellie's small hands twitched, and her eyes blinked, the dullness giving way to confusion. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yes, baby," Anna cried, taking a step forward. "I'm here. Fight it. Ellie, you're stronger than her." Lamashtu let out a furious roar, her wings unfurling as she loomed over Anna. "You dare defy me," she bellowed, her voice shaking the ground. "You are nothing but a fragile, mortal insect. You will fall before me." Anna's fear burned away, replaced by a fierce determination. "You're wrong," she said, her voice steady. "I'm her mother, and there's nothing I won't do to protect her." As Lamashtu lunged toward her, Anna threw herself forward, pushing through the suffocating shadows. Her fingers brushed against Ellie's arm, and the moment they made contact, a surge of warmth flooded through her. Ellie's eyes widened, and the shadows around her shattered like glass. The pulsating mass above them let out an ear-piercing screech before imploding, sending shockwaves through the abyss. Lamashtu shrieked in rage, her form flickering as the light from Ellie and Anna's bond grew brighter and brighter, piercing through the darkness. The demoness recoiled, her fiery eyes blazing with fury. "This isn't over," she spat, her voice filled with venom. "I will find you. I will take you both. You cannot escape me." And then she was gone, her form dissolving into the shadows. Anna collapsed to the ground, clutching Ellie tightly to her chest. The abyss around them began to dissolve, the darkness giving way to a soft, golden light. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Anna could breathe freely. "Mommy," Ellie whispered, her voice trembling. "I was so scared." Anna kissed her forehead, tears streaming down her face. "I know, baby. I was too. But it's over now. We're safe." The light grew brighter, enveloping them in its warmth. Anna closed her eyes, holding Ellie close as the world around them shifted and changed. When she opened her eyes again, they were back in the motel room. The harsh neon light filtered through the curtains, and the air was filled with the faint hum of the air conditioner. Ellie was asleep in her arms, her breathing slow and steady. Anna glanced at Richard, who was sitting on the edge of the bed, his face pale but his eyes clear. "Anna," he said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "I'm so sorry." She shook her head, exhaustion washing over her. "We'll talk later," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Right now, we just need to rest." That night, for the first time in weeks, Anna slept peacefully, but as she drifted off, a faint, familiar whisper echoed in the back of her mind. "This isn't over." The battle was won, but Anna knew the war was far from over. Lamashtu was out there, waiting, watching, biding her time. But for now, they were together, and that was all that mattered. The motel room was silent except for the rhythmic hum of the air conditioner. Anna sat in the corner chair, her eyes fixed on Ellie, who was curled up under the blanket. The child's face was peaceful now, her breathing slow and even. Every so often, Anna's gaze drifted to Richard, who had fallen into a restless sleep on the other bed. His chest rose and fell unevenly, his fingers twitching as if he were fighting unseen battles in his dreams. Anna's exhaustion weighed on her like a heavy blanket, but she couldn't bring herself to close her eyes. Every time she blinked, she saw Lamashtu's glowing red eyes, heard the demoness' mocking laughter. The faint whispers that lingered in the back of her mind had grown softer but hadn't disappeared entirely. They seemed to ebb and flow like the tide, waiting for her guard to drop. The neon sign outside the window flickered, casting faint shadows across the room. Anna flinched at the sudden movement, her heart racing. The paranoia was eating at her, every creak and groan of the building twisting into something sinister in her imagination. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to focus. She couldn't afford to fall apart now. Ellie needed her. Richard needed her. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft rustling sound. At first, she thought it was the wind, but then she noticed movement out of the corner of her eye. The shadows in the room seemed to shift unnaturally, curling along the walls like smoke. Anna froze, her breath catching in her throat. She stood slowly, her eyes darting around the room. The shadows weren't just moving, they were growing, stretching across the ceiling and pooling in the corners like ink. "Not again," Anna whispered, her voice trembling. She moved toward Ellie's bed, her instincts screaming at her to protect her daughter. As she reached for Ellie, a low, guttural growl rumbled through the room. Anna spun around, her back to the bed, shielding Ellie with her body. The shadows coalesced into a figure, tall and hunched, its form flickering like a broken projection. Two glowing red eyes pierced the darkness, locking onto Anna with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Did you think it would be that easy?" a voice hissed, echoing from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was Lamashtu, her presence overwhelming and suffocating. The room seemed to close in, the walls pressing closer, the air growing thick and heavy. Anna clenched her fists, forcing herself to stand tall. "You can't have her," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "You're not welcome here." Lamashtu laughed, a sound that sent shivers down Anna's spine. You are in no position to make demands. Mortal, you may have pulled her from my grasp for now, but the bond remains. She will never be free of me, and neither will you. The shadows surged forward, wrapping around Anna's arms and legs like chains. She struggled against them, but they were unyielding, dragging her to her knees. The air grew colder, and Anna's breath came out in visible puffs. Let her go, Anna gasped, her voice barely audible over the roaring in her ears. Take me instead. Just leave her alone. Lamashtu tilted her head, her jagged teeth glinting in the dim light. Your sacrifice would mean nothing, she sneered. She is the one I desire. Her fear, her innocence, they are delicious, and they are mine. Ellie stirred in her sleep, her small body curling tighter under the blanket. The shadows reached toward her, their tendrils hovering inches from her face. Anna screamed, a raw, desperate sound that echoed through the room. Stay away from her, she shouted, her voice breaking. Lamashtu paused, her glowing eyes narrowing. Such a pitiful display, she said, her tone dripping with disdain. But if you wish to play hero, I will grant you a chance. Let us see how far your love will take you. The shadows released Anna suddenly, and she collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. When she looked up, the room had changed. The walls were no longer solid, but seemed to melt and twist, the edges fading into an endless void. The motel room was gone, replaced by a vast, desolate landscape shrouded in darkness. Anna scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding. Where am I? She demanded, her voice echoing in the emptiness. This is my domain, Lamashtu said, her voice surrounding Anna like a suffocating fog. If you wish to save her, you must face me here. But be warned, this place will break you. Anna glanced around, searching for any sign of Ellie. The ground beneath her feet was cold and slick, like wet stone, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. In the distance, she saw a faint, flickering light. Without hesitation, she began to run toward it, her determination overriding her fear. As she ran, the landscape shifted around her, the ground cracking and splitting beneath her feet. She stumbled but kept moving, her eyes fixed on the light. The whispers grew louder, swirling around her like a swarm of insects. They spoke in a language she didn't understand, their guttural tones filling her with a sense of dread. The light grew brighter as she approached, and she realized it was coming from a towering structure, a grotesque, spire-like formation made of bone and stone. It pulsed with an eerie, unnatural glow, and Anna could feel the malevolent energy radiating from it. At the base of the spire, Ellie stood, her small figure silhouetted against the light. Ellie, Anna called, her voice breaking with relief. Ellie turned slowly, her face pale and expressionless. Her eyes were black, empty voids that seemed to suck in the light around her. Anna's heart sank. This wasn't her daughter. This was something else. Mommy, Ellie said, her voice hollow and distant. Why did you let her take me? Anna froze, her breath catching in her throat. I didn't let her take you, she said, her voice shaking. I fought for you. I'm still fighting for you. Ellie tilted her head, her empty eyes narrowing. It's too late. She's already won. The spire began to vibrate, a low, resonant hum that seemed to shake the very ground. The shadows around it twisted and writhed, forming into monstrous shapes with glowing red eyes and gaping maws. They moved toward Anna, their guttural growls filling the air. Anna's fear threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced herself to stand her ground. I won't let her win, she said, her voice trembling but fierce. Ellie, I know you're in there. Fight her. Fight for me. Fight for us. For a moment, the shadows hesitated, their movements faltering. Ellie's expression shifted, a flicker of recognition passing across her face. Mommy, she whispered, her voice soft and trembling. Yes, baby, Anna said, taking a step forward. I'm here. Come to me. Ellie took a hesitant step toward Anna, but the shadows surged forward, wrapping around her like chains. She screamed, her voice filled with terror and pain. Help me. Mommy. Anna rushed toward her, her heart pounding. She reached for Ellie, her fingers brushing against her daughter's hand. The moment they made contact, a blinding light erupted from the spire, engulfing them both. When the light faded, Anna found herself back in the motel room, Ellie cradled in her arms. The room was silent, the oppressive weight of Lamashtu's presence gone. Anna held Ellie tightly, tears streaming down her face. "It's over," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're safe now." Ellie clung to her, her small body shaking. "I was so scared. Mommy." "I know, baby," Anna said, kissing her forehead. "But I'll never let anything happen to you again." As the first rays of dawn filtered through the curtains, Anna allowed herself to hope that they had finally escaped. But in the back of her mind, the faint echo of Lamashtu's laughter lingered, a chilling reminder that the battle might not be over. The sunrise was a pale, muted glow that barely pierced the gray clouds hanging low over the horizon. Anna sat on the edge of the motel bed, her eyes fixed on Ellie as she slept. The child's face was serene now, her breathing even and steady. But Anna couldn't shake the sense of unease curling in her chest. It was too quiet, the kind of silence that felt like a held breath before something terrible. Richard stirred on the other bed, groaning softly as he sat up. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "How long was I out?" he asked, his voice rough. "All night," Anna replied, her own voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "You needed it." Richard nodded, running a hand through his disheveled hair. His gaze drifted to Ellie, and a flicker of guilt crossed his face. "How is she?" "She's better," Anna said, though the words felt hollow. "She slept through the night." "And you?" he asked, his eyes meeting hers. "Did you sleep at all?" Anna shook her head, a bitter smile tugging at her lips. "Not much of a choice. Someone has to keep watch." Richard's jaw tightened, and he looked away. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken apologies and lingering tension. Finally, he sighed. "Anna, I don't," she interrupted, her tone sharper than she intended. She softened it with a sigh. "I can't do this right now. Richard, we need to focus on keeping her safe." He nodded, his shoulders sagging. "You're right." A sudden knock at the door shattered the fragile quiet. Anna's heart leapt into her throat, and she jumped to her feet, motioning for Richard to stay with Ellie. She approached the door cautiously, her hand hovering over the handle. "Who is it?" she called, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. There was a pause. Then a man's voice answered. "My name's Father Kellen. I think you need my help." Anna hesitated, exchanging a wary glance with Richard. He stood and moved closer, his body tense. "How does he know we're here?" Richard whispered. Anna didn't answer. Her hand tightened around the handle, and she slowly opened the door. A man stood on the threshold, his dark coat streaked with rain. His face was lined with age, his eyes sharp and piercing beneath heavy brows. He carried a small satchel slung over one shoulder and a crucifix around his neck. Despite his calm demeanor, there was a weight about him, as if he carried the burden of many battles. "I don't know how much time we have," Father Kellen said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "But if we don't act quickly, she'll come for the girl again." Anna's breath caught. "How do you know about her?" she demanded. "I've been hunting Lamashtu for a long time," Kellen replied, his tone grim. "Her presence leaves a mark, and it's not hard to follow once you know what to look for." His gaze shifted to Ellie, who was stirring on the bed. "She's still tethered to her, isn't she?" Anna nodded reluctantly. "I thought destroying the statue would break the connection, but—" Kellen shook his head. "The statue was only a vessel. The bond goes much deeper. Lamashtu doesn't give up her prey easily." "Then what do we do?" Richard asked, his voice tight with desperation. "How do we stop her?" Kellen's expression hardened. "We exorcise her completely, but it won't be easy." Anna clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. "Tell us what to do." Kellen spread a series of tools and relics across the motel's small table: candles, vials of holy water, salt, and a thick, leather-bound book. He began to outline the steps of the ritual, his voice calm but firm. "This will require all of us," he said. "Lamashtu feeds on fear and doubt, so we must stay strong. No matter what happens, do not break the circle." Anna and Richard listened intently, their determination growing with every word. Kellen turned to Ellie, who sat on the bed clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Are you ready to be brave, little one?" he asked gently. Ellie nodded, her voice small but steady. "Yes." Kellen smiled, a flicker of warmth breaking through his grim exterior. "Good. Then let's begin." The motel room was transformed into a makeshift sanctum. Candles flickered at each corner, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Salt lines were drawn in intricate patterns across the floor, forming a protective circle around Ellie. She sat at its center, her wide eyes watching as Kellen muttered prayers under his breath. Anna and Richard stood just outside the circle, holding hands tightly. Kellen took his place at the head, his leather-bound book open before him. He began to chant in a low, steady voice, the ancient words resonating through the room. At first, nothing happened. The air was still, the only sound Kellen's voice. But then, a cold wind swept through the room, snuffing out the candles. The shadows on the walls began to twist and writhe, forming grotesque shapes that seemed to leer at them. "She's here," Kellen said, his voice steady. "Hold the line." A guttural growl filled the air, followed by Lamashtu's mocking laughter. The shadows coalesced into her towering form, her glowing red eyes burning with malice. "You think you can banish me?" she snarled, her voice shaking the room. "You are nothing." Anna's grip on Richard's hand tightened as the demoness lunged at the circle. The salt line flared with light, and Lamashtu recoiled with a furious scream. The air grew colder, and the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. Kellen's chant rose in intensity, his voice unwavering. The shadows lashed at the circle, testing its strength, but the protective barrier held. Anna felt a surge of hope until Ellie cried out, clutching her head. "Mommy, it hurts," she sobbed, tears streaming down her face. Anna's heart broke, but she forced herself to stay strong. "It's okay, baby," she said, her voice trembling. "You're going to be okay." Lamashtu's laughter echoed again, filled with cruel delight. "She is mine," the demoness hissed. "You cannot take her from me." Kellen's voice grew louder, drowning out the whispers. The room trembled as the light from the circle grew brighter, forcing the shadows back. Lamashtu screamed, her form flickering and twisting. "No," she roared. "You cannot defeat me." With one final, piercing cry, the shadows exploded outward, and the room was plunged into silence. The candles flickered back to life, their soft glow illuminating the now empty space. Lamashtu was gone. Ellie collapsed into Anna's arms, her small body trembling. Anna held her tightly, tears streaming down her face. "It's over," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You're safe now." Kellen closed his book, his shoulders sagging with exhaustion. "The bond is broken," he said. "She won't return." Anna looked up at him, her gratitude shining through her tears. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know how to repay you." Kellen shook his head. "No need. Just take care of her." He glanced at Ellie, a faint smile softening his expression. "She's stronger than she knows." As dawn broke outside the motel window, Anna allowed herself to hope that their nightmare was finally over. But deep in her heart, she knew that the scars of Lamashtu's terror would remain with them forever. The battle was won, but the journey toward healing was just beginning. The first rays of sunlight crept through the thin motel curtains, casting a golden glow over the room. Anna sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers running through Ellie's hair as the child slept. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Ellie's face was peaceful, her breathing steady and calm. Richard stood by the window, staring out at the quiet parking lot. His shoulders were slumped, his expression distant, but there was a flicker of relief in his eyes. Father Kellen had left before dawn, slipping away with a quiet farewell. "The fight is yours now," he had said, his words a mixture of encouragement and warning. Anna hadn't asked where he was going. She was too drained to care. All that mattered was that Lamashtu was gone, her hold on Ellie shattered. But even in the quiet stillness of the morning, Anna couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air felt too heavy, the silence too loud. She tried to push the thoughts away, telling herself it was just the aftermath of the nightmare they had endured. But deep down, She knew better. When Ellie stirred, Anna leaned down, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. "Good morning, baby," she said softly. Ellie blinked up at her, her blue eyes clear and bright. "Good morning, Mommy." She paused, her brows knitting together. "Did I have a bad dream?" Anna forced a smile. "It's over now," she said, brushing a strand of hair from Ellie's face. "Everything's going to be okay." Ellie nodded, though her expression remained troubled. She sat up slowly, clutching her stuffed rabbit to her chest. "I feel funny," she said, her voice small. "What do you mean, funny?" Anna asked, her heart skipping a beat. Ellie hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands. "Like, she's still watching me." Anna's blood ran cold. She glanced at Richard, who had turned away from the window, his face pale. "Ellie," Anna said carefully, her voice steady. "Did you see her? Did she say anything to you?" Ellie shook her head. "No, it's just a feeling." Richard crossed the room, kneeling beside Ellie. "It's just a memory," he said gently. "She's gone now. You're safe." But as he spoke, Anna noticed something that made her stomach twist. The shadows in the room seemed to shift, curling along the edges of the walls like smoke. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to set her nerves on edge. "Richard," Anna said, her voice low, "do you see that?" He followed her gaze, his brow furrowing. "See what?" "The shadows," Anna whispered. "They're moving." Richard shook his head. "It's just the light," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. Anna wasn't convinced. She stood, her eyes scanning the room. The heavy feeling in her chest grew stronger, a sense of impending doom pressing down on her like a weight. "We need to leave," she said suddenly. "Now." Richard frowned. "Anna, we just—" "Now," she snapped, her voice trembling. She turned to Ellie, scooping the child into her arms. "We're not staying here." Richard didn't argue. He grabbed their bags, and within minutes, they were in the car, driving away from the motel. The road stretched out before them, empty and endless, the barren landscape blurring into the horizon. Anna kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see glowing red eyes staring back at her. Ellie was quiet in the back seat, her small hands clutching her rabbit. Richard sat beside her, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the road. The tension in the car was palpable, the silence broken only by the hum of the engine. After what felt like hours, they pulled into a small diner on the outskirts of a nameless town. The sign above the door flickered, its neon letters spelling out Harriet's Kitchen. Anna parked the car and turned to Richard. "Stay with Ellie," she said. "I'll get us something to eat." He nodded, his expression unreadable. Inside, the diner was quiet, its booths half empty. The smell of coffee and fried food filled the air, but Anna barely noticed. She approached the counter, ordering 3 sandwiches and a coffee to go. As she waited, her mind raced, replaying the events of the past few days. When the waitress handed her the bag of food, Anna thanked her and turned to leave. But as she passed a mirror on the wall, she froze. For a split second, she thought she saw something, a flicker of movement, a pair of glowing red eyes watching her. She blinked, and it was gone. Her hands shook as she pushed open the door, stepping into the bright sunlight. Richard was leaning against the car, his arms crossed, his expression tense. "You okay?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. Anna nodded, though she didn't trust her voice. She handed him the bag of food and slid into the driver's seat, her heart pounding. "Let's just keep going," she said. The road stretched on, the miles blending into one another. The tension in the car grew with each passing hour, the air thick with unspoken fears. Anna drove in silence, her eyes fixed on the horizon. But no matter how far they went, the sense of unease never left her. It was late afternoon when they pulled into a rest stop. The parking lot was empty, the small building that housed the bathrooms and vending machines casting long shadows in the fading light. Anna parked the car and turned to Richard. "I need to stretch my legs," she said. "Watch Ellie." Richard nodded, his expression wary. "Don't take too long." Anna stepped out of the car, the cool air biting at her skin. She walked toward the edge of the parking lot, her mind racing. The whispers she had thought were gone had returned, faint and distant but unmistakable. She rubbed her temples, trying to block them out. "Anna," a voice called. She turned sharply, her heart pounding. Richard was standing by the car, his face pale. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It's Ellie," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's different." Anna rushed back to the car, her heart in her throat. Ellie was sitting in the back seat, her face pale, her eyes wide and glassy. She was muttering something under her breath, her voice too low to hear. "Ellie," Anna said, her voice shaking. "Baby, what's wrong?" Ellie didn't respond. Her lips kept moving, the words tumbling out in a harsh, guttural rhythm. Anna leaned closer, her blood turning to ice as she recognized the language. It was the same ancient, guttural tongue Lamashtu had spoken. "No," Anna whispered, her hands trembling. "Not again." Ellie's eyes flicked to hers, and for a moment, Anna saw something familiar. But then they darkened, turning black as night. The shadows in the car twisted and writhed, coiling around Ellie like tendrils. "Mommy," Ellie said, her voice hollow and distant. "She's here." Anna's scream was swallowed by the darkness,